I walked down the cracked concrete walkway toward the old wraparound porch, my heart pounding as sunlight filtered through the oak tree above. I paused at the bottom step, recalling the RSVP I'd sent last week. I remembered Dad's laughter when I told him I would bring my fiancé to our family gathering. His chuckle had sounded harmless, but it stung. Our neighborhood smelled like freshly cut grass and rain on hot pavement. I brushed my dark hair behind my ears and took a deep breath, the reunion I'd promised. The door creaked open before I reached the top step. I stepped inside and smelled the familiar mix of baked pies and old wood polish. Dad stood in the foyer with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed as if he'd been battling thoughts all morning. His salt and pepper hair gleamed under the chandelier. He offered a curt nod, never mentioning my RSVP or the laughter that had followed it. I crossed the tiled floor and felt each square beneath my feet. A breeze drifted through the open window, carrying a hint of lilac from Mom's garden. My palms grew sweaty. I needed a plan to bridge the gap between us tonight. I took a step toward the living room and noticed framed photographs lining the walls. They captured moments from my childhood, birthday parties, school graduations, summer vacations at the lake. Each frame felt heavy, as if it held unspoken memories. I wondered if Dad saw those nights differently after receiving my RSVP. Weeks earlier, I had feared this meeting. My fiancé and I had planned this surprise visit for months. I imagined Dad's reaction when he finally understood. My toes curled against the polished hardwood floor as I exhaled. Somewhere nearby, the grandfather clock ticked, measuring time. Until our inevitable confrontation, I moved into the kitchen where the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the tiled countertop. A slice of apple pie sat on a plate beside the coffee maker. I remembered Mom's recipe and the way she sang while she baked. She was gone now and I felt her absence keenly. Dad had taken over her role, but his laughter at my RSVP reminded me that our relationship was fragile. I closed my eyes and pictured my fiancé's smiling face. She believed in this family despite its flaws. I whispered her name under my breath for courage. Quietly today my phone buzzed in my pocket and I checked the screen. It was a text from my fiancé. Message, "You got this." I smiled despite the unexpected tension building in my chest. I slipped my phone into my jeans and walked toward the back door. I noticed the paint peeling on the porch railing where Mom had once planted fairy lights. I touched the wood with my fingertips and felt a rush of memories. I realized Dad must have picked this house for me, engraving my love for home into every corner. I needed to remind him of that bond. I pulled open the door and stepped onto the porch, feeling the warped floorboards sink beneath my weight. The evening sky glowed pink and orange above the rooftops. A car drove on the street beyond the yard where Mom had once planted her favorite roses. I felt their petals in my mind as I moved forward. I glanced down at my name engraved in the weathered wood of the bottom step as the sun slipped behind the horizon. My breath caught when Dad's voice called from the open doorway, "You're here." I squared my shoulders, prepared to tell the truth. Dad stood under the porch light, its glow dancing on his face. His eyes looked weary. There was something else I couldn't place. I inhaled, the scent of jasmine from a nearby bush mingling with the faint aroma of dinner. I knew I had to speak first. I took a step closer, clutching the envelope in my pocket. Inside were photographs and letters explaining everything: our engagement, my fiancé's background, how we plan to honor traditions and create new ones. My voice trembled as I said, "I'm marrying Sarah." His lips tightened. The moment stretched between us a thin wire. He didn't move for a heartbeat. The porch light flickered as a breeze whispered through the railing. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I felt the warmth of memory we'd shared flicker. Those lights Dad had strung years ago. I opened the envelope and placed the photographs one by one in his hand. He traced the images with a trembling finger, me and Sarah in front of the bakery where we met, family dinners with us smiling, our hands intertwined on the lake dock. His breath caught. He looked at me, eyes softening. I braced myself for what came next. He cleared his throat, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. For a moment, I thought he'd speak. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a wooden block. He turned it, revealing my name carved into its surface. The grain of the wood caught the porch light and cast a pattern on his hand. My heart fluttered as I recognized his handiwork. Mom had taken him to woodworking classes before she died, and Dad had continued making little gifts for me since. He handed me the block. "I'm proud of you," he said. I felt tears sting my eyes. I held the wooden block in my hands, feeling its smooth edges and the weight of my name carved so carefully. Dad's eyes glistened in the porch light as he stepped back, offering me a small, tentative smile. The evening air had cooled, carrying the scent of jasmine and cut grass, and I realized how tight I'd been holding my breath. Sarah's words, "You got this," echoed in my mind. I looked up at Dad, my voice catching, "Thank you for believing in me." He nodded, turning the block over in his palm as if rediscovering its grain for the first time. In that moment, I understood that forgiveness might be the most fragile gift of all. I motioned toward the door, slipping the wooden block into my pocket. "Come in," I said, glancing down the walkway where the last rays of sunset painted long shadows across the lawn. Sarah stood just beyond the threshold, her hand resting on mine. She offered Dad a shy wave that wavered between confidence and nerves. He inclined his head, and I felt the tension in my chest loosen slightly. Inside, the kitchen table had been cleared to make room for dinner, our dinner, a silent invitation to celebrate together. The smell of roasted vegetables and fresh basil welcomed us, and I realized how deeply I'd missed this shared warmth that we sat around the table, the faded linoleum tabletop recalling countless family meals, and I poured glasses of iced tea for Dad and Sarah. Dad cleared his throat, setting down his napkin carefully. "Tell me about her," he said, voice steady but wary. I watched Sarah's eyes meet his own before she began to speak about her childhood in a small Midwestern town, her years studying art history, and the moment she'd first seen me smile. In the bakery where we met. Dad listened with his arms unfolding, leaning forward as if drawn in by each sentence. I saw pride beginning to replace skepticism in his gaze. When Sarah finished, Dad sipped his tea and set the glass down with a soft clink. "You know, your mother loved artists," he said quietly, glancing at a framed painting of Mom on the living room wall. "She'd be proud." His voice trembled, and I felt a surge of gratitude and guilt, grateful for his warmth, guilty for ever doubting his capacity to love someone new in my life. I reached out, placing my hand over his. "I miss her every day," I admitted. The confession seemed to hang in the air, heavy as the humid night outside, binding us together in shared sorrow and love. Dad inhaled slowly. "I suppose I was worried," he confessed. "Worried your mother's traditions might be lost, that a new person couldn't understand what this family means." He swept a hand around the room, around the photographs, the heirloom clock, the chipped china on the hutch. I squeezed his hand, choosing my words with care. "Sarah doesn't want to replace Mom," I said. "She wants to build on what we had, to honor the traditions you and Mom created. We've talked about keeping your apple pie recipe alive at every celebration." Dad's eyes softened, a small smile tugging at his lips. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the condensation on her glass. "I'd be honored to learn, Mr. Thompson," she said, using his last name respectfully. Dad's stoic expression cracked as he chuckled. "Well, then you'll have to come over for baking lessons," he replied, voice lighter than I'd heard in years. Relief flooded me, warm and bright. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt the walls around my heart shift, opening just enough to let new memories slip in alongside the old. Outside, a sudden summer rain began to patter against the windows, the sound like a lullaby on the tin roof. The electricity flickered, and Dad reached up, switching on the overhead light with a practiced motion. The raindrops traced lines down the window pane, glinting in the glow of the porch lamp. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. Sarah joined me, resting her head on my shoulder. Dad watched us, leaning against the doorframe, a silhouette softened by the rain. In that quiet tableau, I felt a profound sense of belonging. Back at the table, the conversation turned to lighter topics, childhood pranks, embarrassing family stories, the neighbor's notoriously stubborn cat. Laughter filled the room, echoing in the corners where silence once reigned. Dad told a story about Mom hiding sprigs of mint in his coat pocket to surprise him at work. I laughed so hard my sides ached. Sarah's laughter mingled with mine, bright and genuine, and I caught Dad's eye, seeing something in him I hadn't seen before. Hope. Later, as the rain tapered off, I found the box of old family albums in the hallway closet. We gathered on the living room floor, flipping through yellowing pages of photographs, Mom smiling in a bathing suit at the lake, me taking my first steps, Dad proudly holding a newborn me in his arms. Sarah listened to each story I told, her eyes shining as she absorbed every detail. Dad added bits of memory, correcting my faulty recollections, smiling at images of a younger, happier us. I felt tears spring to my eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. When we finally closed the last album, Dad stood and stretched, the wood floors creaking beneath his feet. He scratched the back of his neck, glancing at me with a warmth I'd yearned for. I guess I've been a bit out of practice letting someone new in, he said softly. I stood, crossing the room to hug him, burying my face in his shoulder. Thank you for letting her in, I whispered. Sarah watched us with tears glistening in her own eyes, and I realized we had crossed an invisible threshold together. Dad pulled back slightly, and reached into his pocket, producing a small, folded piece of paper. I found this when I was cleaning up, he said, handing it to me. I unfolded it, recognizing my own handwriting, a childhood promise to build a life filled with love. Underneath, in Dad's careful script, someone had added, and to always find your way home. I looked up at him, my heart full. We're home, I said. He nodded, and we stood there, the three of us, as the rain stopped and the world outside glowed under the first stars of the evening. The morning light filtered through the linen curtains in my childhood bedroom, soft and golden, as I sat on the edge of my bed lacing my wedding shoes. My heart fluttered, equal parts excitement and nerves, while the scent of fresh-cut lilies drifted in from the kitchen. I couldn't believe the day had finally come. Yesterday's reconciliation on the porch, Dad's gift of that wooden block and his quiet blessing, felt like a dream now. I smoothed my ivory gown and took a deep breath, remembering how he laughed at my RSVP, not knowing how vital that moment would become. Downstairs, voices rose in a happy clamor as bridesmaids slipped into pastel dresses and Sarah shared jokes with my sister, Emma. The house felt alive, walls echoing with decades of love, birthday parties, holiday feasts, quiet Sunday mornings. Dad hovered in the doorway of the living room, his arms crossed but a tender smile playing at his lips. He caught my eye in the hallway mirror and gave a small nod that made tears prick at my eyelids. I mouthed, "Thank you," and he lifted one hand in a gentle wave. I stepped outside onto the front porch, my gown's hem brushing over the weathered wood where my name was still engraved on the bottom step. The engraving was smoother now, polished by Dad's careful hands, and rainstorms passed. It shone in the morning sun, a permanent reminder of how he came to accept Sarah and our future together. My fingers brushed the letters, and I felt a steady calm wash over me. In that moment, I knew I could face anything ahead. The florist arrived, carrying baskets of white peonies and eucalyptus. She whispered compliments about the porch's charm and offered to weave a small garland around the railing. I glanced at Dad, who surprised me by stepping forward. He bent to help secure the garland, his large hands deft and sure. Together, we wound greenery around the posts, sharing quiet conversation about my mother's favorite blooms. He laughed softly when I teased him about learning flower arranging. His sequence of clipped stems and vines was adorably awkward. That a vintage car rolled up the street at exactly noon, shining under the sun. It was our getaway car, a family heirloom Dad had restored in secret for months. He beamed as he wiped a spot of dust from the chrome bumper. I followed him to admire the sleek lines, his pride as radiant as the car's polished surface. He draped a proud arm around my shoulders. I wanted everything to be perfect for you, he said. I hugged him tight, inhaling the familiar cedarwood scent of his leather jacket. The ceremony began in the backyard beneath the old oak tree that had shaded our summers. Guests gathered on white folding chairs as string lights hung overhead, boughs trembling slightly in the afternoon breeze. My father, normally reserved, walked me down the handmade aisle, each plank stained a soft gray. My hand trembled in his as we stepped onto the wooden path, his careful craftsmanship everywhere I looked. My eyes met Sarah's across the aisle, her smile steadying my nerves. Together, we exchanged vows that spoke of love, respect, and honoring. Family legacies. When I placed the ring on Sarah's finger, Dad's shoulders relaxed visibly, and he lifted his phone to capture the moment. His eyes shone with tears as he lowered it, wiping his cheek with a trembling thumb. I felt such profound gratitude. He hadn't just accepted our relationship, he'd celebrated it. That moment crystallized years of tension and misunderstanding into something lasting and beautiful. The applause that followed felt like a chorus of approval, a welcome I had longed for. After the ceremony, the reception spilled onto the porch under the warming glow of twinkling lights. Laughter and music mingled with the scent of jasmine and grilled rosemary chicken. Dad stood at the edge of the gathering, offering toasts and sharing stories about my mother, her laughter, her kindness, her passion for life. We all raised our glasses as he recounted how Mom insisted on matching napkins to the bridesmaids' dresses at every wedding she attended. The memory brought smiles and a few wistful sighs, tying our past to the bright promise of this new chapter. When the last guest had gone home and the moon hung low in the sky, Sarah and I stayed to help Dad clear the tables. We tucked string lights into their box, folded linens, and stacked chairs under the porch cover. The quiet night air was cool, scented with dew. Dad leaned against the railing and watched us work. I handed him the final stack of plates, and he tousled my hair affectionately. "You did good, kid," he said softly. I laughed, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek. "We did good," I corrected, linking my arm with his as we finished. Inside, the house felt hushed, every chair and table back in place. I led Dad into the living room, where the grandfather clock ticked steadily. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the wooden block with my name, Dad's first handcrafted gift after Mom's passing. I set it on the mantel next to a framed photo of all three of us, me as a toddler, Dad smiling proudly beside Mom. Under the porch light's glow in that portrait, Dad looked younger, hopeful. I realized then that his laughter at my RSVP hadn't been cruelty but fear of change. Dad settled into his favorite armchair and patted the seat beside him. I sat, leaning my head on his shoulder. He draped an arm around me, his hand warm against my wedding gown. For a long while, neither of us spoke, content in shared silence. Outside, the first cicadas began their nighttime chorus, and I felt deeply rooted in the place I'd always called home. I traced the carvings on the wooden block and whispered, "Thank you for engraving my name into this porch, into our lives." He smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "You'll always belong here," he murmured. And in that moment, I knew. He meant it for me, for Sarah, and for every memory we would carve into these boards in the years to come. The porch that had once been the stage for my father's doubt was now the foundation of our family's future, and I couldn't wait to build on it together.